it's so embedded in the West that those outside of the West have no value in their lives. So those of us who are inside of the West, we got to raise it over and over and over again. We're going to try to make you accountable. You got to be answerable. I salute your loved ones for that one.
They do deserve all the credit, 100%. Hi, good day. It's been a long time. Welcome back to Unapologetic. And today we speaking to Professor Dr. Brother Cornel West, who's running to be the president of the USA, among other things, but has been a very, for many decades, he's been a civil rights activist. Dr. Cornel West, how are you doing?
Oh, brother, I'm blessed to be in dialogue with you. It's already a joy. Your sense of humanity, your sense of humor, the sharpness of your mind, and the sweetness of your spirit.
Thank you.
Is a welcoming thing, though, brother. Appreciate you, man. Really do.
Thank you so much. Very, very flattering indeed. Brother Cornel, I've already been telling you before we actually started rolling that today we're going to speak about while you're running to be a presidential candidate. We're not really going to focus on that in the first 75% of the conversation. We're going to focus on you. We're going to focus on your life story. We're going to focus on how you have seen the civil rights movement change and evolve throughout your life in the USA. And we're also obviously going to speak about Gaza and Palestine, and that's very much connected to the civil rights global struggle in many ways. But just to kick things off, you were born in 1953 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Your grandfather was a Baptist person, Baptist preacher. What was your family home like when you were growing up?
Well, I tell you, I was blessed to be born on the chocolate side of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa, Oklahoma was the center of what they call Black Wall Street. And it was burnt down completely in 1921. This was part of the white supremacist assault on Black people. So Tulsa, Oklahoma has a historic significance. I was born in the same hospital as the Wilson brothers of the Gap Band, one of the great rhythm blues bands. And that Gap means Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. That's where Black Wall Street was. That was a very center of the Black community. You got people like John Hope Franklin, whose father, he's one of the greatest Black historians, whose father was there. Ralph Ellison, the great novelist, was down the way in Oklahoma City. Charlie Christian, the great jazz musician on the guitar, was from that same area. So that it's really quite historically significant. You know, Oklahoma was a state that there was an attempt to make it an all Black and red state with Black people and indigenous people together. Ralph Ellison's mother, Ida, actually was part of that movement. So Oklahoma has a radical history. Eugene Debs, Democratic Socialist presidential candidate, his largest following was in Oklahoma. You never know it today. Oklahoma now is deeply right-wing across the board, the most right-wing state in many ways. But when oil and the right-wing Christian evangelicals set in, Oklahoma became very different. But historically, Oklahoma was known as this radical territory. Chief Sam, who was one of the great Black nationalists, inspired Marcus Garvey, was based in Oklahoma because once they didn't pull off the end name of making Oklahoma a Black state, he went to Sierra Leone, took Black people back to Africa, and that was part of the inspiration of Marcus Garvey. So a lot of people downplay the history of Oklahoma, and I was just blessed to be born there, and I went back every summer. But I didn't stay in Oklahoma. I was there for just a very short time. Ended up in Topeka, Kansas, where my brother was part of Brown v. Board of Education, the historic 1954 Supreme Court decision integrating schools. And then I moved to with mom and dad and Cynthia and Cheryl and Cliff to Sacramento, California. And that's really where I was shaped.
How old were you when you went to California?
I was 4.5.
4.5. Okay, and I'm guessing you mentioned 3 of your siblings. You have 3 other siblings, right?
So I got a magnificent brother who I'll never be half the human being he is, and I've got 2 marvelous sisters, Cynthia and Cheryl, and then of course you got mom and dad who are in a league of their own. I'm my mama's child and my daddy's kid, and this is a supernatural love that they poured into us every day. Courage, integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, treating people right, being of service to the least of these. That's the West household, inseparable from Shiloh Baptist Church, which is the biggest Black church in Sacramento. And Oak Park, I grew up in Glen Elder, which was a Black section. Oak Park was another big Black section. And the Black Panther Party was right down the street from Shiloh Baptist Church. And so when you really look at the West household, Shiloh Baptist Church, Willie P. Cook and Deacon Hinton and Sarah Ray, my vacation Bible school and Sunday school teacher, and then the Black Panther Party. with Huey Newton, Bobby Seale. Now, he's in Oakland. They were in Oakland, but they would come back down to Sacramento Ford. Mark Teeman and them went to jail. But it was really that crucible that produced the cracked vessel that I am, my brother.
How much of an influence did your mom and dad have on you, as opposed to your grandfather, who's a Baptist preacher, and also your grandfather, who's a Baptist preacher? Is he on your maternal side or paternal side?
And he was Clifton L. West the first. My father, Clifton L. West Jr., and then my brother's Clifton L. West the third, and then I named my son Clifton. He named his son Cornel, and so Clifton West runs very, very deep, and he was the pastor of what is now the largest black church in Tulsa, Metropolitan Baptist Church in Northeast Tulsa, which is again the chocolate side of Tulsa. And Granddad was highly influential. There's no doubt about that. So was Grandma with Lovey O'Gwen, and then my other granddad, Nick Bias, in Orange, Texas, and T. Rose, my grandmother on my mother's side. Mom and Dad were still the most influential. There's no doubt about it. But it's very interesting. You think about this, my brother, that my mother's mother, named Debbie, she was 31 years old. She had a tooth pulled. There's only one black doctor in town. This is in Crawley, Louisiana. And so they took her to the White Hospital. They wouldn't allow her in the White Hospital, so she bled to death on the stairs of that White Hospital. She was 31 years old. My mother was only 2 years old. Granddad was already a deacon. He pulled his rifle out, was getting ready to do some folk in, and folk held him back, and the white folk ran him out of town, and he ended up in Orange, Texas. And that's where my mother grew up, in Orange, Texas. And T. Rose, who was her grandmother, was the woman who my granddad not remarried, but married. But she raised my mother, even though she was not my mother's biological mother. Mom's biological mother was killed by white supremacist hatred and bigotry. The same way I had a great uncle who came back from World War I, who was lynched, wrapped around the U.S. flag. That's why that flag means something different to me than it means to a lot of other people. People have a right to perceiving the flag in one way, but I'll never forget the story of his being told about this U.S. flag wrapped around his body. He's hanging from a tree. That was in Louisiana too. So Jim Crow, had a deep impact on me though, brother. In 1953, Jim Crow was still the norm of the day. Democratic Party, Republican Party had huge conventions, talked about liberty and democracy, and didn't say a word about trying to pull the rug from under lynching, American terrorism, or Jim Crow. We had to wait for a major movement of Martin King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Medgar Evers, and so many others, Ella Baker, to break the back of American apartheid, break the back of American terrorism, Jim Crow, Jane Crow. And so it's been very influential in terms of the backdrop and the background of who I am. There's no doubt about that. And I am grateful that I was shaped by a great black people who, in the face of overwhelmingly chronic hatred, produced love warriors. In the face of overwhelming chronic terror, produced freedom fighters. And in the face of overwhelming and chronic trauma, produced wounded healers. And even in the face of sorrow, produced joy spreaders. And it's precisely that love, that freedom, that healing, and that joy that was poured into me as a young black child coming out of Tulsa, Topeka, and Sacramento, and then of course on to the college at Harvard, there in Cambridge and Princeton and in New Jersey, and then on to teaching at Union Seminary, meeting the great Edward Said, who was my dear, dear, dear brother. I met at 23 years old. I was teaching at Union Seminary. He was teaching at Columbia across the street. I would sit in on all of his lectures. We would steal away and break bread, go to his home with Mary and his magnificent wife and his 2 children. And it goes on and on. Paul Beauvais. I won't get into all the names of Jonathan Arac. We had some magnificent times, man. James Cone at Union, the founder of Black Liberation Theology. James Melvin Washington, James Forbes, Samuel Roberts, Beverly Harrison. These radical folk. Dorothy Zole was part of the Frankfurt School, worked with Adorno, and worked with Tillich, worked with Horkheimer. in others. Then, of course, Stanley Aronowitz and Frederick Jameson, founders of social text that I work with very closely. And then Paul Sweezy and Harry Magdoff at Monthly Review, who I work with very, very closely. So I was really part of a rich network as my life unfolded. But in the end, I remained that little black brother shaped by West Household, Shiloh Baptist Church, and the Black Panther Party. One other crucial thing, of course, is the nightclub. See, because I'm a Christian, but I'm not a Puritan. So I spent a lot of time in nightclubs. As you know, I put out 3 records, and we actually got a Grammy with Arturo O'Farrell's magnificent 4 questions that I did spoken word from Du Bois just 2 years ago in the Afro-Latin jazz orchestra that he conducts. So that the nightclub and music has been constitutive of who I am, along with those other indispensable pillars of my life.
You mentioned black heroes and people who are able to look upon the oppression upon you with love and healing. Let's speak a bit about I mean, arguably the most famous of them, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Both of them were killed just when you were almost a teenager. In the case of Malcolm X, when you were a young teenager, 15 years old. In the case of Martin Luther King. Do you remember anecdotally just like how those days played out for you? Do you actually remember what you were doing when you heard the news, for example, of either of them being killed? And how that impacted you or in the community in some way?
Yeah. It's a wonderful question, though, brother. You see, when I was growing up in the black community, it was mainly sports and entertainment and personal relations, so that I thought I was going to be the next Willie Mays, or I thought I was going to be the next James Brown. I was running track at the time. It was April 4th, 1968. I was 14 because I was born in June. I would be 15 that year. And when I heard that Brother Martin had been killed, that hit me so hard. And I said to myself, good God Almighty, here I'm thinking about being an entertainer, which is a serious vocation, being a sportsman, which is a substantive vocation too. But I got to really find what my calling is. And I decided that day I wanted to make the world safe for the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., no matter what. I had a different relation to Malcolm because I came to Malcolm later. It's very interesting. Malcolm had died 3 years earlier, but I was so young, 11 years old actually, because I'd be 12 that year. He died in February. I shot in February, and I died, my birthday is in June. But the impact of Malcolm really was through the Black Panther Party and through his autobiography, which was a different kind of experience. I saw Martin speak. Mom and Dad took us to see Martin Luther King Jr. speak at Memorial Auditorium in Sacramento. And that was in 1963. And I'll never forget what he made me feel. I couldn't remember too many of the words. He said time is neutral and a few things I remembered, but he made me feel like, I said, my God, this brother is for real. He is as for real as James Brown on the stage that I'd already seen, or Aretha Franklin, who came out of my church music tradition that all of us exalted and was deferential to. But it was really when I was 14 that I looked myself very unflinchingly and honestly in the mirror and said, I got to build on his legacy. He's my kind of brother. At the deepest level, he is my kind of brother. That's why the most important book I've ever done is The Radical King, which is the book that keeps his legacy alive, pulling out his radical writings and reflecting on each section and writing my own individual essay in my relation to him. That's the book I feel closest to because intellectually, politically, spiritually, morally, he is the closest to me. So you've actually chosen the right brother. Malcolm, I don't exist without Malcolm X. There's no doubt about that. But it was Martin that I encountered early and the deepest, even though Malcolm's influence has been profound too.
You were in Harvard for you graduated in Harvard and then you went to Princeton. Why Ivy League schools at a time where, because of the civil rights movement, you may have went to Howard College? Like, what was the thinking behind that?
Well, one, that my brother had gone to Berkeley. He was a great track star. In fact, he's one of the most unique track figures in the history of track and field because he ran almost record times, all the way from the 100 to 200, 400, all the way up to 10,000 meters. Very rare that you would get somebody. He still holds the freshman record for the mile at UC Berkeley, but he went to Berkeley in '68. He was there with Eddie Hart and others who won the NCAA in 1970. And my first choice was to go to Berkeley because I've been following my brother all my life. I've been trying to be like Cliff. You know what I mean? If I could be like Cliff 25% of the time, then I got to be one of the coolest brothers on the block. But when I thought of no longer following him and going somewhere else, I had applied to Harvard. I think Notre Dame too. I don't know what it was about Harvard and Notre Dame, but they struck my fancy. And when I applied and was admitted, I ended up in Cambridge, and that was a good move. And you're right. I mean, the main reason I was there was because of the rebellion of the masses of Black people. That Harvard had admitted only about 7 or 8 people a few years before, and my year they admitted 90. And it's not like you had some great intellectual renaissance in the Black community. No. Black folk put so much pressure on these mainstream institutions that they had to open up. And so they let us all in, and shoot, we came in there listening to Dramatics and the Delphonics and the Temptations and the Miracles and James Brown and Wilson Pickett and Isaac Hayes and Aretha and Gladys Knight. We just brought our own rich tradition with us. And it was actually a decolonizing sensibility because, again, you see, I can't even begin to talk about the impact of the Black Panther Party, really. Because that was the intellectual exposure to the Marxist tradition. We read C.L.R. James, definitely read Wretched of the Earth. That's why you can imagine, and I was blessed to write the introduction to Wretched of the Earth just a few years ago. And I'm thinking back as Black brother in Sacramento, first reading that with the brothers and sisters, and now being able to give an interpretation to the world. I said, oh my God, this is a beautiful, beautiful thing. But I can't downplay the role of understanding predatory capitalist processes and its relation to empirical tentacles around the world, short-term profit as a fundamental end and aim of capitalist modes of production and ways in which it's shaped and molded white supremacist structures of meaning and structures of feeling, and how that was connected to patriarchy, how that was connected to the stealing of territories, subjugation of proletarians. All of that was part and parcel of our world. Now, you can imagine, we still teenagers, man. We tried to make sense of all of this. So when I go to Harvard, first thing I do is what? We formed the breakfast program, the Black Panther Party in Jamaica Plain. Prison program right there, where Malcolm was in the prison program. I've been blessed to teach in prisons now for 51 years. Because ever since, it was just a praxis. That was a crucial context of teaching, a crucial context of reading, not just the classroom at Harvard, but right there on the block, in the streets. And it was always viewed as part and parcel of a whole way of life. You see, I never accepted the academic differentiation and compartmentalization of different spheres. Knowledge is in one corner, or science in one corner, and beauty is in another corner, and ethics is in another corner, and religion was in another corner. No, it was a more organic conception of a holistic way of being in the world, so that the social and the spiritual, the personal and the political, the existential and the economic were always intertwined. And even given all of the parts, the whole is still more than the sum of the parts, because there's something inexplicable and mysterious and intangible in that whole that we are as persons in relation to our families and our communities and our traditions and our various struggles in the world. And you can see I've been just so very blessed because I'm still here. So many of my partners were shot and assassinated. Brother Mumia Abu-Jamal, you see right up here. Blessed to write 2 introductions to 2 of his classical works. Have been on death row, has been incarcerated in such a vicious way. H. Rap Brown, still incarcerated. Imam Jamil Abdullah Al-Hamid. H. Rap Brown is one of the great freedom fighters of the last 50 years. And I was blessed to write the afterword for that text as well. But all of this is just a way of trying to be true to my calling. This is what I'm here to do.
Obviously, going to Harvard in the 70s, as you mentioned, was the first year where there was really like a major intake of black students. When you look at Harvard today, or even later, after being there for many years, or even in the early 2000s, once you had a almost 30-year relationship with the institution, on and off, how do you see the progress? And I mean, how much has been built? And I'm sure to a large extent you've been directly or indirectly shaped what a young black person or any person of any color would be studying at Harvard, studying what you did in 1970 compared to 2000. How substantially different is it? And is it something that you could have foreseen back in 1970, that at some point in some time in the future, kids won't be learning what they were learning in 1970, but we were learning something else formally?
Yeah, what a wonderful question, though, brother. See, when I arrived at Harvard in 1970, with this qualitative leap, not just in number, but in kind of students at Harvard. Harvard had been the bastion of the WASP. It was deeply anti-Jewish in terms of its quotas, only let a certain number of Jews in. It was deeply anti-black. You only had 1 or 2 or 3 students every year. It was male. Of course, Radcliffe College was the woman counterpart institution. They would come together my year, which is very interesting. We finally had the Radcliffe Sisters of All Colors integrated into the Harvard, the Brothers of All Colors. But you got to remember now, I say 1970, it was a moment in which first is high moment for social movements, anti-war movement on the one hand, the Black freedom movement known as the Civil Rights movement on the other. But it was also only, maybe 25 years after the beginning of the age of America. The Europeanization of the world, the age of Europe had begun to collapse from 1492 to 1945. After 1945, Europe itself, which had been the source of the Europeans that had shaped the empires that shaped the whole world, and the image and interest began to slowly collapse. Decolonization became the most important process. And so as the European empires began to collapse, the American empire on the one hand, the Soviet empire on the other, but the American empire much more powerful militarily and socially and economically. And there was a certain boisterousness and self-confidence in the American empire. And they figure it would last for another 100, 150, 200 years. And so in the midst of the strong social movements, there was the American empire really situating itself thoroughly at the center of the historical stage. And it peaks about 1990. It doesn't last that long. So when I go back to Harvard to teach in 1994, where you've got a number of black folk now as professors, you got more and more people of color, but the empire is beginning to unravel very, very slowly. And by the time you get to 2015, 2020, and now 2024, where the decline and the deterioration of the American empire is undeniable. And at the center of that decline is what? The rule of big money, the rule of big military, the organized greed that goes along with that, the weaponizing of hatred of the enemies, be it the communists in the 40s and 50s and 60s, or be it Muslims in the early part of the 21st century, or today, so many terrorist groups of the global South, all demonized enemies, a threat to the American empire. And Harvard itself is really a fascinating measure, because by 1970, the WASP were beginning to slowly be pushed aside. The white Anglo-Saxon Protestants pushed aside, you see. And you get more Jewish brothers and sisters. You get some white ethnics, and you get black folk. Not too many brown, not too many Asian until the last 20 years or so. So when I arrived at Harvard, we had Asians must have been about 2%. We had one Puerto Rican who was my roommate, my dear brother Roberto Garcia, along with Robert Gerard and Neil Brown. These are people I take a bullet for. In fact, they were just with me at the Gifford lectures that I gave in Scotland. Have them on the front row. They were my roommates at Harvard. It's a beautiful moment. But Harvard itself now is so commodified, so corporatized. It is so commercialized. It's money, money, money. I mean, you just push out of place the Harvard president based on dictates of big money having to do with what's going on in Gaza. We'll talk about that later. The genocide and ethnic cleansing and apartheid conditions of the precious Palestinian brothers and sisters have to deal with it. But big money now talks with such a unregulated volume that Harvard itself becomes, a site of very deep decline and decay, man. It's just, but this is true for institutions across the board in the American empire. You can say the same thing about Congress, which is so much legalized bribery and normalized corruption and politicized larceny. You can say the same thing about so many of the churches and mosques and synagogues. You get commodified religion, you get prosperity Christianity, you get market-driven Judaism, you get market-driven Buddhism, and so forth. Islam is fascinating because you have the new waves of immigrants coming into the United States as a result of the 1965 Immigration Act, right? Between 1924 and 1965, you had white supremacist immigration policies. So only those particular folk from certain European countries could get in. At 65, as a result of the Black Freedom Movement, they opened the door, and lo and behold, you get Africans, Asians, and so on. You always had some Caribbean, no doubt, from West Indies and other places. But the larger opening that takes place in 65 begins now to result in significant numbers of Muslims. And of course, the challenge of Muslims is what? To not get so thoroughly Americanized, not get thoroughly commodified, obsessed with American dream in terms of pecuniary benefits and material toys and status and spectacle. How do you hold on to Allah so that success does not become the God that displaces Allah? That's always been the challenge of folk coming to America, because America too often views life as a gold rush. And when you view life as a gold rush, you end up worshiping the golden calf, and the golden rule becomes he who has the gold will rules. Triumph of Thrasymachus in Plato's Republic. Might makes right. Power dictates every semblance of morality, and the end of life is he or she who dies with the most material toys. Now that is about as spiritually empty and morally bankrupt as one can get. And I'm not the first to see that. You see it in Melville's Moby Dick. You see it in Eliot's The Howl of Men. You see it in Great Gatsby of F. Scott Fitzgerald, believing in the green light, but the green light leads toward self-destruction if it doesn't have any soul craft, it doesn't have any integrity, it doesn't have any deeper sense of what it is to be human. You heard it the other day with Sister Harris. The greatest story ever told is the American story. Pure blasphemy and idolatry. Get off the crack pipe, Sister Harris. Now, for me as a Christian, the greatest story is about a Palestinian Jew named Jesus. The greatest privilege is to being an American. How narrow, how not just provincial, but pathological. The greatest privilege of being alive is to love and be loved wherever you are in the world. That's idolatry. You got to say those things and run for president. That's part of an empire that has grown rich and grown powerful, but refuses to grow up. Ethel Matheson used to say, Harvard professor, author of the great 1941 classic, The American Renaissance. He killed himself. He was a gay brother, towering Christian socialist, towering literary critic, but he used to begin so many lectures. America's unique among empires, the move from perceived innocence to corruption without a mediating stage of maturity. He's absolutely right. And of course, you read the great writers from the James Baldwins and the Toni Morrisons, or the Hart Cranes, or the William Faulkners. We're talking about greatness that cuts across skin color, cuts across region, wrestling with what it means to be human at the deepest level. They see the childishness of so much of American empire in terms of its leaders, in terms of its truncated visions. And it has, strong implications because it can blow up the whole world. It can escalate regional war in the Middle East. It can provoke Russia more and more for World War III, or China over Taiwan for World War III, so that American studies become something that's crucial in terms of its global impact. But I happen to be a Jesus-loving free Black man born in the belly of the American imperial beast. So I am as American as the Ku Klux Klan. I am as American as Martin Luther King Jr., Edward Said, a Rabbi Heschel, a Dorothy Day, a Ella Baker. But it's on the left wing of the ideological spectrum, which is simply to say those who have a deep love and commitment and solidarity with the wretched of the earth, in the language of Francis Fanon, poor and working people here and around the world.
You're speaking a lot about globalism. I just want to bring you back to your own journey with that, because obviously you were born very much steeped in Black society, Black issues, the civil rights
Absolutely.
movement. In 1987, while you were already a professor and you've already qualified, and you were between Princeton and Yale and Harvard, you get arrested for protesting anti-apartheid protests. It's around the same time that the Intifada is also occurring in the West Bank and throughout Palestine at the time, throughout Israel and Palestine. What is that like for you? Let's first deal with your arrest. What was that day like? What were you actually, from what you can recall, back in 1987? And what's your own journey in terms of understanding global solidarity as opposed to, it's quite normal for all human beings to first see the injustice around them, and that's their first frontier before they start realizing there's a much broader struggle. What was that journey like? But first, just go back to 1987 when you were arrested, and what do you remember from that day? And have you been arrested since, by the way?
Have I been arrested?
Have you been arrested since? I mean, like, how many times have you been arrested for protesting?
Lord, many times. It was in Ferguson we got arrested a number of times. It's been Baltimore. Yeah, I've been arrested with Brother Sekou and others. I've been arrested too many times to count. We got arrested here in Harlem. I live in Harlem. I'm looking at Harlem right now. I can almost see the Apollo from here. We got arrested right there on Frederick Douglass Avenue with the stop and frisk struggle. You remember 2011 with Brother Carl Dix, Revolutionary Communist Party, with Brother Jim Fritos and a number of others. But God, you're taking me down memory lane. Now, you see, I had just been in your own country, South Africa. I went in underground. You remember Bayers Nade?
Yes, I do.
He was the head of the South African Council of Churches. His father was one of the founders of the Afrikaner Brotherhood, the deeply neo-fascist group. Yep. He broke with his father. And he and Desmond Tutu and Alan Bozak invited me. And I snuck in, and it was really quite fascinating. But you can imagine I was deeply immersed. I was there at Deduza at the funeral with Tutu. And I spoke at that funeral, I remember. This is right before the rest of when I got back. But I had a chance to spend some very, very moving and life-changing experiences in South Africa. See, Alan Bozak and Desmond Tutu had taught at Union Seminary when I was here, so I had a chance to meet them and get to know them very well. And the Susulus, only I can go on and on. My God, what's it, brother Joe Slovo and Billy Nair, all of those folk were my brothers and sisters. Man, I know that's kind of older generation for you. But, good God, Albertina and Walter, good God, I love those folks. So when I got back, I got tenure at Yale in '84, and we were having a major demonstration, and a number of us were arrested. I remember my dear brother, David Montgomery, who was ex-member of the Communist Party, who was professor at Yale. He paid my bail because they had my bail much higher than the others. And I recall I was just getting ready to go on sabbatical. I'd been invited to teach University of Paris, Saint-Denis, Paris Week, with Lyotard and Deleuze, who were teaching there at the time. In fact, my office was right next to Daniel Defer, who was the lover of Foucault for 25 years or so. So we had magnificent times together. But I was planning to go to the University of Paris. When I got arrested, Giamatti, who was the president of Yale at the time, told me there's never been in the history of Yale a Yale professor who was arrested on Yale property. So he said, shame on you. I thought it was a compliment. You know what I mean? I'm thinking like, Jesus Christ, I must really be doing something right, because I know I can do things wrong like anybody else. But what he told me was, you got to cancel your sabbatical, University of Paris. I said, no, I'm not doing that though, man. I've already set this thing up. He said, I'm telling you, you must cancel. You must stay at Yale as a result of being arrested and humiliating Yale, bringing shame on Yale and so forth. I said, no, this is something that I'm very proud of. Joe Summers, I remember, went to jail with me, who's now out as he got a church in Ann Arbor. In fact, Emily, his daughter, is one of my goddaughters. And but what happened was, I decided I was going to teach at Yale in Paris anyway, but I still had to teach at Yale, so that for 11 weeks I was flying back and forth every week from New Haven to Paris. And it was fun, but exhausting. But it was a result of precisely, trying to take a stand. And I ended up coming back to Union, and then I went straight to the Princeton when Toni Morrison called me and whispered in my ear with that indescribable voice of hers, "Let's create an intellectual neighborhood together, honey." I said, that sounds like the voice of God. I'm sorry about the conflation and confusion, but sounded divine to me. And so I zoomed straight to Princeton under the leadership at that time of Ruth Simmons, who was associate provost, who would become president of Smith, first black woman, president of Brown, first black woman, but she brought Toni Morrison there, and we brought in Nell Painter and Arnold Rampersad. Al Roberto was already there, and we created one of the great Black history departments at Princeton before I went off to Harvard with Skip Gates and Anthony Appiah and company. So that the sense of bearing witness as a person, as a citizen, as a free black man, as a Christian, has always been integral to my understanding of my vocation as an intellectual. Always.
No, I mean, you've basically spent most of your academic career as a teacher between Ivy League schools, and a lot of the time between Princeton and Harvard. And you've had it's well known, you've had a contentious relationship with Harvard. We're going to come to the tenure sort of dispute that occurred, recently. But just before that, in 2000, Harvard had a new president, and I'm gonna just throw something at you, and then I want your reaction. So the Wikipedia entry. Sure. On this says the following. It says, economist and former U.S. Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers became president of Harvard. Soon after, Summers held a private meeting with Dr. West, in which he reportedly rebuked West for missing too many classes, contributing to great inflation, neglecting serious scholarship, and spending too much time on his financially profitable projects. Summers reportedly suggested that West produce an academic book befitting his professional position, as his recent output had consisted primarily of co-written and edited volumes. What was going on with you and Summers?
Oh, yeah. Summers, he's just such a professional gangster, though, man. Such an unprincipled power player in so many different ways. Of course, he was just lying on me. You know what I mean? I had just produced the American Invasion of Philosophy in '89, Ethical Dimensions of Marxist Thought, 1991, Breaking Bread with Bell Hooks, 1991. 1993, I produced Vortex, Prophetic Thought in Postmodern Times, 2 volumes, Race Matters, Keeping Faith. And then in '98, the book with Roberto Unger, because I taught Roberto Unger at Harvard Law School for 20 years, The Future of American Progressivism. The book with Sylvia Ann Hewlett, The War Against Parents. '99 was a 700-page book called The Cornel West Reader. 2000 was The African American 20th Century with Skip Gates. 2004 was Democracy. So that it was just a joke. I published 12 books in 9 years, and he said no, he hadn't published anything. What he was upset about was
that's what I'm getting to. What was he upset about?
Oh, I tell you what he was upset about. You see, when he took first there was a Harvard president named Neil Rudenstein, who was a marvelous brother. He was a Jewish brother. He had a heart of gold, and he had a dream of creating a dream team of black scholars at Harvard. And that's exactly what he did. He brought in Skip Gates, and Skip Gates brought in William Julius Wilson and Anthony Appiah and myself and all these wonderful black scholars. And those black scholars more and more became the public face of Harvard. Now, keep in mind, when I arrived at Harvard in 1970, he only got just a few ink spots in a whole sea of whiteness. Now, you're talking about the professors. And you had the great Martin Gilson, the great Preston Williams as black professors. First tenured black professor, 68, 70. Now, here in the 90s, the public face, well, you see, when Summers took over, he met with every department at Harvard other than Afro-American Studies. And Skip called up and says, I haven't had my because Skip was head of the department. I haven't had my meeting. I said, he's sending you a message, man. What you mean? I said, he's letting you know how upset he is that we become so publicly visible. And when he talked to Skip, he basically told Skip that. He said, your era is over.
Wow.
And Skip told me, he said, I think he's coming at you, brother, so you got to get ready. Skip writes a 6-page single-space reflection on my work to him. So when he calls me in, he starts cussing. I say, hey, man, don't be cussing. I don't like this kind of license of white people cussing in front of me, like somehow that's the only language I'm into. See, I don't appreciate that at all. And that's how it started. You see, so I said, I'm dealing with a gangster, all right. I know black gangsters, they come in all different colors. And then he starts talking about, you You haven't published? I said, that's a lie, man. You haven't done your homework. And then he says, oh, I can't stand this music that you're producing. This hip hop thing. This is a shame to America. I said, I looked him in the eye. I said, I am as much Harvard or more than you are. He said, I do my work, I teach, and hip hop is part and parcel of my tradition. And most of the record is not all hip hop, but it embraces that. That's right. We got Talib on there. We got Rodrigo on there. We got Andre 3000 on there. But we're going to have Prince on there. We're going to have Gerald Levert on there. We're going to have Lenny Williams on there. That's my tradition. I'm a free man. And I'm in the studio as much as I'm in the street, as much as I'm in the classroom. And so it was very clear that, you know, he is somebody who was just so arrogant and so condescending. And now he's in the driver's seat and you black folk getting pushed aside. And within a matter of months, you know, it was clear, yeah, I didn't have time to deal with this. I met him in October and I made my announcement of leaving Harvard in January. Now I was also hit by cancer. See, I had the last stage of a cancer, and it was unclear whether I would be able to live the whole thing out. You know, I'm just like all of us. I'm on borrowed time, but that was 20-some years ago, and thank God I'm still going. But it was very clear that we were going to have a clash, and it was sad that it became a kind of Black-Jewish clash because historically, Jews have been disproportionately supportive of Black freedom struggles, Black Jewish communists and Jewish socialists. But as Jewish community itself underwent Americanization, seduced by the same forces that we see in Melville and in F. Scott Fitzgerald, organized greed, obsession with status, following what William James called the goddess of success rather than moral and spiritual greatness, that the clash was going to escalate. And then with, you know, the situation in Israel, oh my God, Lord have mercy. You know, I was blessed to travel the country with Stokely Carmichael, known as Kwame Ture, and I would invite him every year to Princeton and would catch hail. You know, there would be big marches against him and demonizing me and the effigy of both of us and so forth. I'm saying, we're just believing a serious dialogue about the Middle East. And he'd come in and give his critiques of Zionism that was scathing. This is way back in the 80s. Zionism is part of racism. They said that's the exemplary anti-Semite. I said, well, listen to his argument. And let me hear your argument. We come for dialogue in this regard. That I think that was part of it too, as you think back on Larry Summers and company. But keep in mind, I'm just like Edward Said. You know, one of Edward Said's great friends and supporters was a Jewish brother named Jonathan Coe. And he stood with Edward, just like Noam Chomsky, stood with Edward, just like Stanley Aronowitz, stood with Edward as serious leftist Jewish brothers and sisters. But the Jewish mainstream, oh man, they start targeting us in a vicious way. I used to be with Edward in his office when all the bodyguards were there and all the different threats were there. And we walked the streets and people would be, you know, rebuking him and scorning him and so forth. All various teachings we had on 82 with the vicious invasion of Lebanon. He and I were there at Columbia and Union here. And oh my God, you know, the sense of the Jewish establishment undergoing panic, going ballistic and coming at us tooth and nail. I dare you use the word occupation. I dare you use the word subjugation. And so settler colonialism, what are you talking about? This is the most anti-Semitic, it's an analysis. It's nothing anti-Semitic at all. It's an analysis. And I think that played a role as well in terms of Summers coming at myself and so many others. And of course, it was reproduced almost 20 years later when I went back to Harvard. And keep in mind, you see, when Niels Rudenstein asked me to come to Harvard, and I arrived, and he said, you'll be the first Black university professor. That's 20 professors out of 2,000. He said, you and William Julius Wilson be the first two. Fine. So I'm a university professor. It's not just tenure. It's a special position. I can teach in any department. You're there with John Rawls, Hillary Putnam, Edward Wilson in biology, writing magnificent books on ants and so forth. That when I get back to Harvard, I don't have tenure. And when I come up for tenure, they won't give it to me. I said, how are you going to not give tenure to somebody you gave a university professor when he was in his 40s? Now he's in his 60s. You don't even want to tenure him. Well, part of it was They weren't going to tell you somebody who got an indictment of a vicious Israeli occupation. No way. No way. You got a Jewish president, you got a Jewish dean, and of course, again, you got Jewish Voices for Peace. You got If Not Now. They're critical of their fellow Jews, but you have to be very honest about the Jewish establishment. They say, oh, Brother West just out there ranting about in his anti-Semitic way. That's not going to stop me from being true to my love for Palestinian brothers and sisters, or any oppressed people. But in this case, the Palestinians. Call me any name you want. Call me any name you want. And when I see what's going on in there, I think of my great uncle Lynch. I think of my grandmother who died on the steps of that white supremacist hospital because they wouldn't touch her body just because she got a tooth pulled out and the blood keeps going and going and going and going. Yes, those memories make a difference. They don't lead me to hate white people or hate Jewish folk, but I hate white supremacy and I hate Jewish supremacy vis-a-vis Palestinians or any other people. And that's just the way it's going to be till I die. You know what I mean? I'm going to be faithful to that particular kind of calling. And so I was blessed to come back to Union Seminary, where I started in 1977. Union Seminary, as you know, is the greatest Protestant seminary of prophetic content, and has always been open to me when I get in trouble. When I get in deep trouble, don't have a job, broke as the Ten Commandments financially, I come back to Union Seminary, where I am now, and it's across from Columbia in the Teachers College there at Columbia, and I have a great time.
You mentioned that almost 20 years ago you had serious cancer and that you had to leave work. How did you eventually beat cancer, and how serious did it get? Was there a period where you were seriously contemplating that you may indeed pass away? Like, just how was your battle against cancer? Just tell us about that.
But the grace of God and the tremendous talent of the doctors, though, man. No, I was told this was it, and I just said to myself, I was 48 years old when I said, I've been invited to the banquet of life for 48 years. I've experienced an embarrassment of riches. I've been so blessed and loved and affirmed by mom and dad and Shiloh and friends and fellow professors, the Jeff Stouts and the Al Robertos of the world. And it was just time to go. You know, it's time to go. It's time to go. 48 years old is a long, long time. My great hero's Chekhov, he's dead at 44. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, good God almighty, 48 years old is a lot of years, especially for a black man. But I've had 23 more now, like 71, and plan to be as tied to my calling as I can before I go. But yeah, those are some tough times, though, man. Definitely.
I mean, we're about to start talking about the elections, but not this one. 2008, Barack Obama, comes on the scene. When you first saw Barack Obama, before he was the president, when you first saw him speaking, when you first started getting some notoriety, what were your thoughts, and how have those thoughts changed and evolved?
Well, I didn't know that much about him. I didn't follow his career when he was in Chicago. I think Adolph Reed is one of the great left political theorists, had already written about Obama, I think in the Village Voice and other places, but I didn't really take note of Obama at all. The first time I really heard of Obama was when he gave a speech in Boston at the 2004 Democratic National Convention. I think John Kerry was a candidate that year. And he said, America is a magical place. And I went on TV a couple of days later. Somebody asked me to comment. I said, this brother's going to have a Christopher Columbus experience. Ain't nothing magical about America at all whatsoever. You're going to encounter the legacy of genocide, the legacy of enslavement of Africans, the legacy of workers crushed by greedy bosses, what Lenin called the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie between 1877 and 1920, with no labor movement whatsoever, capital and greedy bosses could do anything they like. American workers had no right to collective bargaining at all until 1936. Argentina had it in 1836. They beat America by 100 years. That shows you the power of capital. So that when he said it's a magical place, I said we have a Christopher Columbus experience. He's going to discover some things he didn't expect. He's going to encounter some things he didn't expect. He's a new immigrant. He better wake up and get off the crack pipe. America is what it is, especially it makes progress through tremendous blood, sweat, tears, dealing with repression, dealing with unbelievable attack and assault and rebuke and scorn. That's the history from John Brown to Ella Baker from Elijah Lovejoy, who was killed, white brother, Princeton Theological Seminary graduate of 1840. He was killed in Alton, Illinois, all the way up to Fannie Lou Hamer. And then he called me. I was at Princeton in my office, and he called me and says, well, your language was very harsh, though, brother. I said, yeah, I'm just trying to tell the truth.
So after the interview, Obama called
you? Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, no, it was really right before he decided to run for president, 2007.
Okay,
about
so
2.5.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
But he remembered what I said.
Okay, yes.
And he was asking for support and so on. And I was telling him, but I said, I have one question for you, man. What is your relation to the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer? That's my question.
And what did he say?
And he said, you know, and I know that I'm not as radical as you are. I don't have those same kind of commitments, but I'm deeply influenced and I'm shaped by that. And I think maybe we'd be able to work together and come up with some way of bringing pressure to bear on the status quo. And that's when I decided to tell him I would be a critical supporter. And I said I would do all I could to push him across the finish line. And when he wins, I would be his major critic, because the chances are that he'd become well adjusted to injustice and highly accommodated to an unjust status quo.
You told him that? You told him that more or less in that phone call?
Oh, absolutely. When I did 65 events, I said that in every speech. Every speech. Brother Spike Lee had me there at Howard University to speak. And he said, dang, Brother West, I thought you were a supporter. I said, well, I am supporting him, but I'm telling him these are the challenges: poverty, mass incarceration, wealth inequality, imperial policies abroad, from the Middle East to Latin America, and so forth. Because that's just the consistency going back to my first book, Prophesied Deliverance, The Revolutionary Afro-American Christianity, or my book on Marx, Ethical Dimensions of Marxist Thought, you see. And but it was clear that, he had pushed me aside. Why? He had brought in who as his major economic advisor? Larry Summers. He had brought in who as his chief of staff? Rahm Emanuel. He had brought in who? Timothy. What was Timothy's name? The Secretary of Treasury.
Yep.
But you know who I'm talking about. He had been on the New York Stock Exchange here in New York. So that it was very clear who his personnel were, And when, of course, he decided to give Wall Street trillions of dollars and allow homeowners to go under, 10 million of them to go under. And when they had the meeting in March of 2009 with all the CEOs of Wall Street, and he brings the cake and tells them, I stand between you and the masses, you and the pitchforks, he says. And they say, yes. He said, but just know I'm on your side. I knew that my critique was accurate. But that's what you say to poor people. That's what you say to working people. That's what you say to colonized people. That's what you say to dominated people. I am on your side. You don't say that to capital. You don't say that to the white supremacists. You don't say that to the colonizers. So it was very clear. He made it very clear whose side he was on. And he brought in Eric Holder. He brought in Tommy West, who was the wife of Mayor Harris, who was the sister of Kamala Harris. He brought in those people to defend Wall Street, vis-a-vis the homeowners and vis-a-vis those who had been manipulated with all of the crimes of insider trading and market manipulation and fraudulent activities and predatory lending, and not one Wall Street executive goes to jail. And this is at a time in which folk on the block in the hoods and the communities are going to jail with an intensity, with an expansion of mass incarceration regime. It's no accident. You got a black president, black Homeland Security, black attorney general, and you get a Black Lives Matter movement, because the police still killing young black folk. And just let you know, black faces in high places don't translate to any serious empowerment of black working people and black poor people. It's a window dressing of the empire, the window dressing of the predatory capitalist processes that generated class hierarchy. And to keep those black faces highly visible, so it hides and conceals the black suffering, poor suffering, working class suffering in the empire. And America's become very inept with that. I mean, Harris is another example of this as well. You see it in the UN with Sister Linda Greenfield, right? Beautiful black woman, all of that grace in her face, with that struggle in her face, raises her hand to do what? Veto a resolution to stop a genocide. Shame on her. Or they pass it over to Robert Wood, another black man. Veto the resolution to stop genocide. Shame on him. And you can see it across the board. I'm just highlighting certain examples of this as well. Lloyd Austin would be another example of this, you see. And it's It's a serious struggle to get people to kind of see beyond just the skin pigmentation and actually raise deeper issues of what is the ethical content and what are the political consequences for poor and working people. That's always the question. It's not whether there's just a black face or a brown face or a woman at the top.
So when you look back at the 8 years that Obama was in charge, is it for you? I mean, you kind of went in knowing that there's a realistic chance that, given the reality of politics and what has to happen, that he's most likely gonna fail, right? Fail in terms of the aspirations you had for him. But I mean, with the 8 years, do you think did he do worse than you expected, in your view, or was it better than expected? Bear in mind that what follows Obama is Trump. And so answer with that in mind. And it's not just Trump, it's Trump the movement, it's Trump everything, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, and one way of talking about it is, you see, fascism is always attempted to become more full-throated in the history of the United States because it's founded on genocide, indigenous people, stolen land, and genocidal attack through military and disease. And then the barbaric enslavement of Africans. So you've got these realities that are the precondition of American democracy that are almost beyond fascism. So full-throated fascism has always tried to manifest itself. And Trumpism and Trump himself is simply the latest cycle of it. But with Obama, you had a white supremacist backlash because he's black, or at least black in the sense of having this marvelous African father and marvelous white mother from Kansas, so that the deep white supremacist elements in the culture are going to react as if Martin Luther King is running things or Malcolm X is running things. Because when they see black, they just go ballistic no matter what. And they say, no, this is Obama. He's a neoliberal, moderate. Neoliberalism ain't nothing but a class war against poor and working people in the name of chase for profits of corporations and oligopolies, the deregulation across the board of enterprises for the escalation of profits. And the 26,000 bombs dropped every year. Drones, Pakistan, Somalia, the dissolution of Libya, the overthrowing of a democratic regime in Honduras. We can go on and on and on. So there's a sense in which the Obama years cultivated the soil of Trump, because the losers of his corporate globalization, the losers of his deeply predatory capitalist project, devastated workers of all colors, and they were looking for an alternative to him. And if we on the left couldn't provide it, Bernie Sanders tried, and as you know, I was with Bernie twice, trying to speak to the needs of poor and working people of all colors, but we couldn't pull it off. If Obama and the Democratic Party can't provide and deliver for working people, they're going to follow a Pied Piper, a tyrant, a neo-fascist. That's who Trump is. He's a Pied Piper, he's a tyrant, he's a neo-fascist. But he does provide a certain kind of appeal to a people who are thoroughly devastated, thoroughly desperate for some alternative to a present unjust status quo. And so Obama's neoliberalism really kind of sets the framework and the background for the full-throated manifestation of a fascist project. Not ideologically, because Trump doesn't have enough intellectual cogency to have an ideology. He's got a gangster sensibility that spills over into fascist terrain, explicitly, deliberately, and so on. But you can't separate the Democratic Party and Obama's policy, the Nafta and Glass-Steagall's attempt to separate investment, commercial banks. Once those banks were brought together, that was the unleashing of even more organized greed on Wall Street. That's all Democratic Party activity. That's all something Obama himself took for granted or even extended and promoted, you see. So here I am thinking like, how do you keep alive the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou in light of this monstrosity, this catastrophe? Is there any space for truth and justice and love in a world in which organized greed and weaponized hatred and routinized indifference to the vulnerable has just completely taken over. As my brother, my blood brother, because everybody's male's my brother as a Christian, right? So trying to keep track of humanity in them, they made in the image and likeness of a God, have a dignity that I always acknowledge that by calling them brother or a sister or a sibling too. But I got a blood brother named Clifton West, the one I mentioned at the very beginning. And he always tells me, he said, Corn, he said, man, everything's become transactional. Everybody's for sale. And it's all about just getting over. That becomes norm and natural. And that's sick. That's spiritually sick. Nothing transformative. Talk about solidarity, empathy, push to the margins. Something must be wrong with you. You still living in the 60s, Brother West. I get that all the time. You still living in the 60s talking about oppressed people and solidarity with Palestinians. That's played out. You better get moving on your career and on your brand. I said, I ain't got no goddamn brand at all. I got a cause. A brand is your market strategy. A cause is something I live and die for. I'm old school. That's where I am. That's the way I choose. That's how I'm going down. Period. If it don't make no sense to you, then it don't make no sense to you. It's what Monk told Coltrane. When Coltrane said, Monk, that chord just sounds wrong. He said, sometimes wrong is right, Train. I'm trying to find my voice, brother. Now, sometimes wrong is wrong. You got to get the chords right. So, but I mean, I ain't going to play like Father Hines and Earl Gardner. I'm working out my own thing. Theolonius Monk went on to show us that, sometimes wrong is right. Around midnight sounds different than the way Red Garland would play it. Train had been playing with Red Garland, right? Well, that's real. That's true in our lives too. Absolutely. But you have to decide for yourself, and you got to be consistent, constant, honest, candid, even though all of us got gangster elements inside of us, so we fall short.
Do you think Bernie would have been able to, if it was him on the ticket and not Hillary Clinton, do you think he would have been able to beat Trump in 2016?
Yeah, I do. I really do. It showed that the donors and benefactors and the head honchos and top dogs in the Democratic Party, they would have preferred Trump over Bernie because Bernie was coming after their profits. Bernie was coming after their donors, you see.
We've done a diagnosis of Obama's 8 years. When you look at Trump's 4 years, do you think America and the world, to a large extent, were we unscathed? Could it have been much worse? Or do you think it was as bad as everyone thought it would be? Or do you think it could have actually been a lot worse?
It was very bad, no doubt about it, because when the different levels of it, one is just the tone and the ambience and atmosphere. Things get so raw and rude and gangster-like that you just get a flattening in the culture. Not just the politics, but the culture. Then the policies were all, as you know, pro-Wall Street, pro-monopoly, pro-oligopoly. He talked like he was a populist, but he doesn't have a populist bone in his body. But he got away with it because the Democrats were still themselves in the back pocket of the same class that Trump himself was benefiting. And so it could have been much, much worse, but he just didn't know what he was doing. I mean, it was clear that Trump, he was just in over his head, though. Man, he couldn't keep a staff. He doesn't have any vision. He's just moving from one thing to the next. And that's how gangsters behave when they're in situations that they're in over their heads. They just want loyalty. They want people who love them, that defer to them, and had little sense of what he was doing. And so they became a kind of inchoate neo-fascism rather than a more coherent one. And it will probably be even worse this second time if he does win.
When you saw the January 6th and you saw the riots on the Capitol, what was your reflection on that?
I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised at all. I know that, as E. Brown used to say, violence is as American as apple pie. The very dominant metaphor of America, which is frontier, presupposes a civilized side and a barbarian side, and the civilized side engages in conquest over the barbarized side or barbaric side to gain some kind of moral generation through violence. The great work of Richard Slotkin, his book Gunfighter Nation, is one of the books in that trilogy that provide this analysis of just how crucial violence is in America's self-understanding and America's sense of itself, and it was on display. Trump had made a case to them that the election had been stolen, and they were going to express themselves in this violent way and attack the Capitol. And I thought actually it was going to be worse. I thought that they'd even do more damage to the Capitol and the folk around there.
I mean, you officially launched your campaign to be president in June 2023. Now, obviously, between that and now, there's a lot of big events that occur. Probably the most profound is October 7th and the events that right. That's unleashed because of October 7th or due to October 7th. But before we get there, what was sort of going through your mind in the months or the years before you decided, let me run for president?
Well, one is that I'd always said you'd find me in a crack house before you find me in the White House. Because the crack house is really a place where people who have been highly sensitive to pain and suffering in the world attempt to escape by means of flying high in friendly skies through drugs. Whereas the White House is a site of corruption, thoroughgoing corruption, imperial policies, planned assassinations, and on and on and on. And also a place where, folk are trying to guide the empire. And when I looked up and I saw just how weak and feeble the legacy of Martin King was, and it goes back when I was 14 years old to make the world safe for Martin. I saw how weak and feeble the movement had been, and people were acting as if they are caretakers of the movement, the Al Sharptons and others. And I said, no. Sharpton's my brother. We've had wonderful battles together, and we've done different things together, but he falls far, 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 far short. Now, I do too, but not as far as he does in terms of being trying to keep alive the legacy of Martin. And I said, no, somebody's got to be able to step in, not just as an individual, but just as an extension of a legacy. I'm just a wave in an ocean, of a great ocean that has helped shape and mold a great Black people. And Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, and Ida B. Wells Barnett, some of the other towering figures, Malcolm and others, Muhammad Ali in terms of being a free Black man, Richard Pryor and all of his freedom, and Moms Mabley and Duke Ellington and John Coltrane. We can go on and these waves in an ocean. And the three things that hit me though, brother. One was we're at a moment where the choice at that time was between Trump and Biden. And it was clear that most Americans and most Black folk had no excitement. So there was a chance of a third way. The second thing was that the cause and the tradition of empowering poor and working people was still so weak. Even given the Black Lives Movement and others. Black Lives Matter had already been co-opted in many ways by the incorporation. Thank God for the grassroots. As you know, Sister Malena Abdullah, my vice president, she comes out of the grassroots side of that. That's very important. But the movement as a whole had been so thoroughly co-opted with big money and greed and so forth and so on. But then the other thing was just a personal question, which is, well, as I get older, it's time to go for broke. You're not going to be here that much longer. And you want the younger generation to have some sense of what the legacy of Martin was. Be able to have some sense of what people who are trying to tell the truth, whatever the consequences, trying to love folk, trying to fight for justice, trying to exemplify some kind of integrity and honesty without just selling out. And selling out is the norm. Black intellectuals, Black pastors, Black professionals, intellectuals across the board, elites across the board. It's a sellout culture. Everybody's for sale. It's just about getting over. Survival of the slickest. Looking for wealth, you see. There's got to be some countervailing examples, not just for an isolated individual, but a movement. And I've always said my campaign ain't nothing but a moment in a movement. That's why it's truth, justice, love. I said, well, that's not a campaign. There's something else going on. That's right, because when the legacy of Martin spills over intellectual politics, it doesn't look like a political campaign. Something else is going on. And that's true. Something else is going on. Because there's a spiritual and a moral dimension that is very strong. And I refuse to give it up. A lot of my left comrades, they come at me. How come you call everybody brother and sister? That's just not appropriate for politics. Get out of that lane. You don't belong in that lane. Stay in this other moral, spiritual lane. Now, I'm going to be true to myself. And when it spills over electoral politics, I'm still going to be true to myself. And I'm going to tell the truth about the mendacity, tell the truth about the hypocrisy, tell the truth about the criminality in Gaza and other places, tell the truth about the unbelievable bestiality and barbarity of it. And it's going to proceed based on love. I start with a deep love of poor and working people, a deep love of Palestinians, a deep love of dollars, a deep love of landless workers in Brazil, a deep love of Jews who have to come to terms with various kinds of Nazi ideologies. It could be in the 30s or it could be in parts of France. It's a humanistic project, but it's deeply, deeply traditionally leftist because it begins with poor and working people. This is why there's always a Marxist element to it. People say, oh, people gonna think you're a communist. Call me any name you want. Anti-Semite, communist, socialist, whatever you want. I'm a child of the West household, product of Shiloh Baptist Church, a revolutionary Christian who fights all forms of domination and exploitation and is willing to pay a cost and bear a burden in order to bear witness until the worms get my body. Boom. Somebody sang a song. That's right. Because you got to keep the spirit in it, and the spirit won't descend without song. Play a little Coltrane. Play that Lament of Alabama. Play that Psalm of Love Supreme. Play that meditation of After the Rain. That's where I come from. And we ain't even got to Curtis Mayfield yet, let alone James Brown. That's right. That's my shape. Gramsci called it a critical historical inventory of all the forces that go into the shaping of you, yourself, myself, and anybody else. It's always different, but there's overlap. But you got to be true to the best stuff. And everybody got the worst and the best. Absolutely. No doubt about that. But I can tell you, man, when I'm out there getting arrested, I'm out there in demonstrations when I'm listening, I'm surrendering myself to the movement, but critically involved in trying to make sense of how you get through. That's a great joy, man. And it's not the cheap joviality that the Harris people talk about, you see. No. We learn from King Lear. Joy has to go through grief. We learn from the brothers Karamazov and Dostoevsky. Joy goes through grief. Joviality is something else. You see Oprah Winfrey acting all jovial, like somehow this is so great. We got a black woman who's going to head the empire. That ain't joy. That's joviality. Joy comes from where Oprah is from, Mississippi, Delta, Mississippi. That's why I chose to begin my campaign where? In Lexington, Mississippi, and endorsed by Fannie Lou Hamer's party, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, with Brother Conrad and them. Why? Because Mississippi's ground zero. That's where the blues comes from. That's where the struggles of unbelievably dignified black peoples, with Mississippi is a majority chocolate state at that time. South Carolina is the only other one that comes close. And that's where I started, and that's what fortifies me. That what continues to empower me and fortify me. You see, the culture, the music, the love, the sense of being able to find joy through the grief with all the dead bodies. And I think of all the bones of Africans down at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. I think of all of the bones of those in the slave plantations mediated with slave auctions. Just like I think of the bones under the rubble right now in Gaza. Joy through the grief. And I see it in the eyes of my Palestinian brothers and sisters. They give victory signs in the face of a barbaric genocide. That even genocide can't completely crush and suffocate the spirit of a people. And if genocide can't do it, nothing can do it. It's unstoppable. That truth and that justice and that love enacted in struggle. And that's where real joy comes from. See? Substantive joy, costly joy, not that cheap joviality that you get in the professional wrestling-like quality of American politics, be it the Democratic Party or the Republican Party.
You're speaking about Gaza and Palestine, and obviously the awful atrocities that are occurring. You've obviously spent all of your life, I'm talking about just up until 8th of October, so basically 70 years at this point, seeing injustice and seeing, the hypocrisy of empire, the atrocities being rationalized away. But despite all of that and everything, your entire education, have you still? How do you, when you think of all of that, what is your reaction still when you think of how blatant the atrocities committed since the 8th of October have been, and the doublespeak? Just what's your comments on that, and are you surprised, or is this not surprising, and it was in fact just a culmination of what your suspicions were about empire?
Yeah, I think in some ways, my brother, you think of what Leopold did with the precious folk in Congo, almost 9, 10 million gone. Think of Hitler with 6 million Jews and another 4 million communists and socialists and gays and lesbians. I mean, we as a human species, we're just so wretched in so many ways, man. That so much of human history is the history of the kind of cycles of murder and maiming. You know, Hegel said history is a slaughterhouse, right? Edwin Gibbon said it's the register of human crimes and follies of humankind. There is something about the sheer wretchedness. So in that sense, I'm not surprised by human evil, and I'm not paralyzed by despair in the face of human evil. But it's true, and it's highly crystallized, what we see in Gaza, Congo, Sudan, we saw in Rwanda, we saw it with Armenians, the Turks, and so on, that it just reminds us of the depths that we can actually descend to in terms of our wretchedness. And a lot of it, you know, is not just economic, it's not just political, it's psychic. It's a kind of spiritual dimension of the demonic, what Dostoevsky called gratuitous violence producing pleasures for human beings. And it takes on a life and logic of its own. And all human beings are capable of it. There's no doubt about that. Palestinians themselves as human beings, they're capable also of terrorizing and traumatizing and so on. Now, in the context of a settler colonial situation, of course, you've got counterterrorism against terrorism. So the IDF in Israel sets up a context of chronic terror, then you're going to get forms of resistance. You try nonviolent resistance, it doesn't work, they get crushed, and you come up with violent resistance, and you end up with a counter-terror against the terror. Now, I'm against the killing of innocent people no matter what. I'm still very much old-fashioned in that regard. But I do know that it tends to surface, because if you make nonviolent revolution impossible, then violent revolution becomes inevitable. That doesn't mean that I believe in just wanton killing of innocent people. I'm against that. And I have struggles with my left comrades in terms of why are you still so concerned about whether innocent people are killed when hundreds and thousands of innocent people on our side is killed? And I can understand that question, but I still try to keep track of the humanity of everybody. But most importantly for me, we're at a moment now where the whole planet and the species and the future of the planet and the species is at stake. And the deep question is whether we have the individual and institutional and organizational capacity to be countervailing forces against the powerful forms of American terrorism, Israeli terrorism, and so on. Because the whole planet can go under. And it could be, you know, it just could be that self-destruction just awaits, you know, the whole human project with nuclear war and with ecological catastrophe and the greed of fossil fuel companies. They would rather opt for short-term profit rather than long-term existence of the planet. But that's pretty morally barbaric, or immorally barbaric, I should say. But that's in part what we're dealing with. That's why I can understand the various ecological movements, you know, Extinction, Greenpeace, and other folk just trying to have to do something very, very drastic to draw attention, put a spotlight on just where we are on the edge of this cliff as a species. And then when you zero in on the everyday life of oppressed peoples and subjugated peoples and colonized and dominated peoples, it's hard to find some light. You know, we have flickering candles in a way is what our movements are. Flickering candles in the grim and dim night of barbarism. That's very much where we are in so many ways. But it's hard to see because you got all the distractions, all the weapons of distractions in the culture to keep people turning away from what really matters, all the propaganda that's just bombarding people every second to keep them turned away from what is most fundamental: life, death, joy, sorrow, love, love and compassion, the things that really matter, the things that really, really matter.
What's the last year of campaigning amidst what many people call and what is most likely going to be ruled at one day? Eventually, history will rule, if not the law, a genocide. What's the year of campaigning been like? I mean, it's a new terrain for you, I'm guessing.
Something no, it's true. Yep. It's true. Well, you can imagine a lot of adjustment. You know, I went through various changes: People's Party, Green Party, Independent. We founded our own Justice for All party. We've done something that's downright miraculous in terms of we've already got almost 16, 17 states that we did in a matter of months. You've had some parties been around for years and still have 16 and 17. So in that sense, I salute the volunteers. I salute the volunteers. You got of course, Democratic Party, billions of dollars they're going to have. Republican Party, billions of dollars they're going to have. We just passed our first 1 million because we take no money from big. Each contribution, the highest contribution is 6,600. So we take no money from the well-to-do. We have no PACs whatsoever. So much of our work is really on the ground, grassroots, with no cash at all. As I said before, the campaign is broken the Ten Commandments, like most oppressed people's organizations. You to organize people and their spirit and commitment more than big money. And we've been able to constitute and will continue to constitute a certain kind of threat. Of course, they cast it in terms of a spoiler. You're taking somebody's vote. No. Every vote has to be earned. We lay out our vision and analysis. Make a choice. They lay out theirs. Make a choice. If they can't speak to poverty and mass incarceration and genocide, they can't speak to the crucial issues. It's their fault. They need to examine themselves. Shame on them if they don't speak to that. Why should somebody vote for them? And the grandmother and grandfather's just been violated or maimed or murdered, and somehow you're going to view them as a spoiler. No, you take responsibility for your policies. Same is true in terms of at home with the homeless and so forth. Criminalizing the homeless now with a smile. And in America, almost 33% of Black children live in poverty in the richest nation in the history of the world. 22% of all children live in poverty in the United States. The richest empire in the history of the world. That is itself a crime against humanity of a certain moral sort, you see. 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. 3 individuals in America have wealth equivalent to 50% of the whole population, 160 million. That's worse than the medieval period during Europe in terms of maldistribution of wealth, you see. And it's getting worse all the time. Neither party addresses it. The opportunity economy of Harris. Oh my God, that sounds like Reagan in the 1980s. New opportunities here. No, we want to reshape, fundamentally transform the very structures that make sure poverty is abolished. I'm an abolitionist. Homelessness abolished. Minimum wage is a living wage, 27 and above. Decentralize and democratize the monopolies and so forth. And not Green Deal, but massive green project in which workers' voices are heard in a serious way, the kind of thing that my dear brother Richard Wolff talks about, workers' control. And people say, oh, but that has a chance of a snowball in hell. I say, you don't say. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. We love warriors and freedom fighters. We're dreamers. That's exactly right. Because we're in love with these people who they treat like trash. It's clear they don't give a damn about poor people. They don't give a damn about the masses of Black people and indigenous people. They don't give a damn about Palestinians. Everybody knows if those are white babies in Gaza and if Arabs and Africans were doing it, U.S. government would have exactly the opposite policy. U.S. government would be financially supporting the Jewish version of Hamas. And Jewish Hamas version would be heroes fighting against Arabs, fighting against Africans. But no, those babies are Palestinian. No, that terror is coming from Israel tied to U.S. government. So don't give a damn about Palestinian babies and Palestinian innocent folk. That's why they can give up. Oh, it's devastating. Oh, I'm going to have a different tone for the next 5 months. They're dying now, motherfucker. Do something. And you know you would do something if they were different peoples. Be honest. Be candid. We see it. We need to call it for what it is. It's racist. It's sick. It's greedy. Oh, you anti-Semitic? No. If Jews were being treated that way, I would be in solidarity with the Jewish children. I don't care who would be doing it to them. But they're not. And if they were Jewish children, U.S. government would have a different response. Europe would have a different response. But no, they Palestinians. Well, Palestinians mean as much to me as anybody else. Period.
Professor, it's inevitable. I mean, you've had a long history of your name being dragged. It's inevitable when you're running for president. That would happen even more so. And obviously, in the midst of being outspoken against Israel's actions, that too. I'm going to read something. I just want your response. It was basically. Full disclosure. This is probably a hit piece written in December last year, and I'm just quoting from it.
Well, I've had so many of them. You read anything you want.
Just for context, the writer has written on many occasions that the left is anti-Semitic and the left's resistance to Israel is anti-Semitic. So it's coming from that kind of quotes. But this. I'm just going to read you a whole paragraph. This is what they said. There was a dark side to these glory days. It's talking about your glory days. As Forbes revealed in an investigation earlier this month, West is broke, living paycheck to paycheck, he says, despite earning $500,000 a year over the past 3 decades. That's because he has often failed to pay taxes, resulting in liens totaling in the hundreds of thousands. His current IRS bill is approximately $483,000. Despite his sizable debt, he has overspent purchasing multiple homes, including a Four Seasons condo in Boston that one of his ex-wives claims was used to see lovers. Doling out large sums of money to support extramarital affairs is a pattern of his. According to several ex-wives and former girlfriends, he impregnates and abandons women. He even lies to employers, such as when he allegedly took medical leave from Harvard and spent the semester shacking up with a mistress who would bear his child.
Yeah, well, first I know they come at you. They throw everything they can. But first, it's true that I had to move to the Four Seasons because I was part of the Million Man March. And there were folks who showed up, put a gun to my wife's head, and with shotguns, they showed up in my driver's in my driveway. And I was living then in Newton, Massachusetts. I met with the Newton police, and they said, "There's no way we can protect you. You need 24/7 security, and the only 24/7 security is this little small condominium there in Boston, right downtown, across from the Commons." And I moved there immediately with my wife in order to not get killed or murdered. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And there's no doubt about me being behind on my taxes. I've been behind on taxes for many, many, many years. I've had people show up on Christmas Eve knocking on my door with a subpoena saying that you are behind on your taxes and we're keeping track of you. And I take the paper, fine. That's been true for almost 25 years. Very much so. And they're also right about my various marriages that in my various marriages, I pay high alimony. Now, they lied about my child support. I got two of the most magnificent children in the world, but that's my own bias and so forth. Ain't no doubt about that. And I've always not only kept up with supporting them, but actually been pretty, if not extravagant and lavish. I give all that I can. And therefore, I have lived paycheck to paycheck for many, many decades. They're absolutely right about that. Very much so. But all this talk about impregnating X and impregnating Y, you see, that's simply their way of trying to argue that the fact that I have been married a number of times makes me out to be some kind of irresponsible playboy or something. And I think that's ridiculous. It really is. That's ridiculous. So you can go step by step of the various things they try to throw at you in order to degrade you and in order to make sure that what you're talking about in terms of the content of your presentation is pushed aside. And all they can keep contact would be some of the faults. And it's true, of course. I mean, I've got faults. I'm with Samuel Beckett, brother. Try again, fail better. Ain't no doubt about that. But it was a hit piece by Forbes, but there were elements of truth in it in terms of the shift, but they didn't lay out the backdrop. And again, it's partly a matter of, you know what? We don't care about Brother West living under death threat. They know the stories are out there. The gun put to my wife said they don't give a goddamn. You see, so you say to yourself, "Oh, wow. So that's the kind of gangsters you all are." And it's a fascinating thing, the older you get. You have somebody, who, the kind of people who tell your precious mother who's thirsty that they peeing in her mouth, but it's really water. And you say, "Oh, you're going to degrade my mother like that and expect me to somehow view you as having an ounce of moral authority? Zero. Zero. And sadly, my dear brother, that's too much part and parcel of the authorities in the American empire, man. The intellectual ones, the religious ones, they just let you know the people that you love, we don't give a damn about. But we expect you to get on our bandwagon. We expect you to support us. And you say, wait a minute now. I don't ever rule anybody out based on skin color, religion, gender, sexual orientation. But if you make it clear to me that the people who I deeply love, you don't give a dang about, beginning with wife, family, then my relation to degraded and oppressed people around the world, you don't care. We kill 500,000 Iraqis, we don't care. 2,000 soldiers died. This is a major calamity. Please. And then if you're concerned about the Iraqis, they say, you don't give a damn about the American soldiers. That's not the point. You must be anti-American. No, you the ones that don't care about the Iraqis. You the ones that don't care about the Palestinians undergoing this barbaric attack. And that needs to be raised over and over and over again. Why? Because it's so embedded in the West that those outside of the West have no value in their lives. So those of us who are inside of the West, we got to raise it over and over and over again. We're going to try to make you accountable. You got to be answerable. We might not have the power to enforce it. I was telling the group right here in Chicago just last week, but my voice completely gone. We hear every day. How come? Because we love the Palestinian people. We're here every day because we love Black people. We're here every day because we love oppressed people, wherever they are. And we give it all. It's kenosis. We empty ourselves. Enjoy with a smile and some style.
I mean, there's another more strategic critique that comes up, especially regarding, I mean, it's electioneering. It's about the fact that in all likelihood, I mean, even you know that your running is very symbolic and it's about sending a message, right? And then there are elements in the fringes that say by running, you are splitting the vote that most likely would keep Trump out of office. In fact, I mean, USA Today wrote an article. I mean, just for clarity also, the previous article I read wasn't from Forbes, it was the New Republic, but they were citing a Forbes investigation. But that's right. Besides the point. But there was a USA article today that's in front of me that says the following. It says, Republican operatives are helping get your name on the ballot in Wisconsin in order to pull votes away from Democrats. In an election where the race is mainly between Dems and Republicans, what's the logic of running? Firstly, what's your thing about the Republican operatives? What's your response to that? And then what's your analysis on why you are running when, in all likelihood, you may just take some votes away from keeping Trump in office? What's your response?
Well, as you know, nearly 40% of fellow citizens in the United States don't vote at all. They know how rotten and corrupt and corrosive the system is, so they just completely pull back. And a significant amount, large, in fact, amount of folk who I encounter, and the campaign has been magnificent in terms of meeting some lovely people, from all walks of life, all around the country. But most of them say, I would never, ever vote for those two corrupt parties, either one, those candidates, either one. So people say, you're taking from Harris. Someone was taking something from Trump, but mainly from Harris. Now, the people who are going to vote for Harris, going to vote for Harris. And they have a right to think critically for themselves and decide to come down where they come down and vote. But there's large folk who just stay home. Well, they say stay on the couch, as it were, because they can't vote for anybody. I get a significant number of those. So the idea that somehow, I am the spoiler, I'm the one that's the primary cause of a Trump victory and so forth. You see, that to me is empty, though, man. It really is. That each party and each candidate makes their case, and people critically think for themselves and vote and respond to that case. And it's true. I mean, winning has a number of different levels to it. Winning the election. Now, you got to keep in mind, my brother, that it's true that because we're living in real time, we don't really know what's going to happen. And Trump himself could have a stroke. that Harris could have a scandal. I'm still standing. Constant, consistent, same vision, same message, same love, same commitment to justice. You see what I mean? Continually. It could go to the House because nobody gets a number of electoral college. Still in the mix, but not me in the mix. It's people's poor and working people's plight is in the mix. Because when you got billions of dollars on one side, $1 billion on the other side, it's clear who's running things. It's very clear who's running things. And so in that sense, winning has to do with the election. And then, as you mentioned before, winning has to do with keeping the cause highly visible. And then winning also has to do with one's own personal calling and integrity, just telling the truth and trying to make that visible to the younger generation, being true to the best of the older generation, and trying to keep that candle flickering in a moment in which things are just so very dark.
Dr. West, it's been a long discussion. We're about to wrap things up, but just before that, just a quick one. Just give me a response and then give me about 30 seconds of analysis.
Sure.
Biden or Kamala?
In regard to what? Candidate?
No, just to, who would you entrust America with, Biden or Kamala?
Oh my God, neither one, though, brother.
If you had to choose, gun to your head, you have to choose someone.
No, if I had to choose between them, I would steal away in the bar, my Bible and some cognac, and reflect on Du Bois and Toni Morrison and say, I got to rededicate myself to a wholesale united front. And of course, my dear brother, Deruba, who I love so deeply and respect, Black Panther Party back in the 60s, 18, 19 years in jail, now lives in Ghana. He and Kalanji have called for a united front. And I'm with them, because no matter who wins, I'm going to be part of a united front. Justice for All Party, myself as a person. But no, I refuse to even have to make a choice between those two.
What about gun to your head, Kamala or Trump?
Oh my God, you got the Trump, the gangster, and the neo-fascist, and Harris herself leading us toward World War III, talking about the lethal army and willing to use it. I'm like so many of the folk who I talk to on the street. There's got to be a third way. There's got to be a third way, man. I'm telling you. So I refuse to be locked into just that either or. There's got to be a third way. Definitely.
Dr. West, thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to, any question I haven't asked which you haven't answered to, or you think you want a message you want to give just before we wrap up?
Well, I just want to say this, though, brother. I've been blessed, and my beloved wife, Anahita, was blessed to see you on a number of occasions engage in such high quality conversation, allowing people to reflect from the depths of their hearts, minds, and souls. And you have met every standard in this dialogue, though, man. So it has been just an unadulterated joy to be in conversation with you. And thank God there are still thinkers, journalists, human beings like you, because you know how decadent and morally bankrupt so much of journalism is these days. And they have to go against the grain and be in that world, but not of that world. Says a lot about you, says a lot about your mama, your daddy, and all those are shaped and molded and poured into you the way I was poured in by my parents. And so I do want to salute you. I want to go out on a salute to you, though, brother. Definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a great conversation. Best of luck with the elections. We do live, unfortunately, in a very, very... I think most of us have been living the last year with a cloud and a big gloom over us. And none more so than people who've lost their families in the horrible events that have occurred, specifically defenseless children in Gaza who have bombs dropping on them. But it's been a difficult year, and thank you for being a positive voice, as much as one can be positive during this time.
Thank you, my brother. Salute you. God
you
bless you and your loved ones, man.
Best of love to you as well. Thank you, Dr. Cornel West.
All right, though, brother.